start today, I really want us to discuss a couple of stories that came out in Western media over the past week. And this is regarding Yemen and the amount of money the United States has been spending to essentially no result, right? Both the New York Times and CNN last week came out with reports talking about that over the past 3 weeks, the Donald Trump government has spent nearly $1 billion bombing Yemen to, they say, limited results, too little to show for it, all of these euphemisms. What we know from our own reporting is that most of the Ansar Allah leadership remains untouched. Their capabilities as well, as we know, the Yemeni armed forces continue to launch attacks on the Red Sea, continue to launch attacks against Israeli targets, despite this very intense campaign that observers and the sources for these Western news outlets say are quickly diminishing the readiness of the United States Navy, in particular if for a future conflict in the Taiwan Strait. We know, we discussed this last week, that there's been a lot of movements to this base, Diego Garcia, in the Indian Ocean for the U.S. In their attempt to continue their war, not just against Yemen, but possibly soon against Iran. In the report, CNN talks about, they cite some sources talking about the possibility of a ground invasion, that this is actually where things are headed, and that as Gulf nations, in particularly, they mentioned the UAE, may be willing to support this. We had a feature at the Cradle just a few days ago, again talking about Trump's proposed recognition of Somaliland, which is right across the Bab el-Mandeb Strait from Yemen, in exchange for building a base, a new base that would allow them to continue to carry out attacks. But something, one more thing besides the money. And actually, no, before I let you guys go on, I want to mention. So CNN, New York Times says over the past 3 weeks, nearly $1 billion spent just bombing Yemen. Last June, the Wall Street Journal had a report, because remember, this war it started by Biden, continued now by Trump. Last June, Wall Street Journal says $1 billion already spent bombing Yemen, right? So between June and January, imagine maybe yet another billion spent, because the intensity of the attacks were very similar, or throughout the 2024. Now you have this other billion to add to that. On top of that, you have, at the very least, 17 MQ-9 Reaper drones that Ansar Allah has downed over Yemen, each one $30 million. So $30 million a pop for each of these drones. You're talking over $500 million. So all of a sudden, in a year, the United States has spent billions, plural, to bomb Yemen. To what results? What have the results that they have achieved, right? So having said that, I would really like to hear your thoughts about this information that has come out.
Well, I mean, we know that Yemen is the unwinnable theater in much the same way Afghanistan has been. Empires fall when you take on Afghanistan and Yemen. Trump needed to experience that for himself. And, it just reminds me of Signalgate, right? Where the participants in that, top national security discussion on Signal, Trump administration officials were talking about defraying the costs of their military operations in Yemen, passing them on to Europeans. Well, no, Europe knows better. This is something that they conceivably don't even really want to do. Their focus is on Ukraine. So it's going to be ultimately Trump that needs to carry this out if he wants to see, if he wants to do some damage to Yemen. But he will soon enough see that he can't do anything to Yemen, and that Yemen can, in fact, do a lot back to the U.S. military, the U.S. Navy, and its allies in the region. You mentioned, Esteban, the potential involvement of the UAE in ramped up military operations. And I mean, that's fine. Maybe the UAE forgot how its capital cities or its cities were targeted by Ansar Allah missiles not too long ago. Maybe a helpful reminder is necessary. The Saudis, of course, have remained quiet in this, but we know where the Saudis stand. So I can't imagine that the Saudis are very thrilled about the renewal of the war. MBS, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, had wanted this. I mean, it's been a few years. He's wanted this to go away. The Yemen problem for him to go away. But any efforts he made to secure a truce with Ansar Allah was, brushed aside by the Americans. The Americans had a veto, and they didn't want the Saudis and the Yemenis to reach a ceasefire. So, now Trump, new president, right, is trying this on for size again, and he will learn, I think, very quickly that it's an unwinnable war, and it will cost him billions and billions of dollars. But also, I think, importantly, to shine a light on some of the things that could prove to be a further, not just his treasury being drained, but, a further embarrassment to Trump. And we know he likes to be the best and the greatest. Is the footage the Americans showed of them targeting supposedly a group of Yemeni militants turned out to be just a tribal gathering. And they showed them blowing up a whole lot of people sitting around in a square for a tribal meeting. Of course, the media hasn't really emphasized this, even though he did initially, but I think Yemen spells a lot of trouble for Trump. And this is even before he's begun his ramp up to an Iran war. So yeah, much to watch in the next few weeks here.
I just want to mention, this is the video that Trump tweets, right? He claims that this is like a meeting of Ansar Allah leaders. For some reason, in the middle of the desert, they decide to meet in this long circle to discuss, I guess, attacks. It's a snuff film. It's a snuff film that the U.S. president tweets. This is tantamount to George W. Bush, if Twitter had existed back then, tweeting the collateral murder video that WikiLeaks, showed a few years after it happened. It's exactly the same. And one last thing. In his tweet, Trump says they will never sink our ships again. What does that mean? Does that mean that Yemen has already sunk a U.S. battleship and we're just finding out about it via this snuff film?
Yeah, I want to say that last episode, we mentioned that the way they are dealing with Yemen is very dangerous. And this is the consequences. They are killing civilians, and they are doubling down that they are armed people. Because as we said last episode, it's clear that Trump and his cabinet, they have no idea of what's happening in Yemen. They just want to bomb, to show off. And we said this is dangerous, and that's what happened. And it's a disgrace. It's funny and disgrace, and it's sad for me to see people just gathering. We don't know the reason of their gathering, but they were gathering, and just an American airplane that came maybe from a Gulf country, from also a neighbor, and bombed them and killed 30 people. This is very sad. And for people who
They said
don't
it was
know,
an Aid, something.
but
That's
yeah,
what I saw.
yeah, it might be Eid, it might be a gathering, because people don't know there is cultures outside of the United States and outside of Europe. You might be happy, and you put, for instance, on Christmas, and you have a culture which is a tree, and you put stuff down the tree. This is your culture. Other people don't do that. There is people like in Yemen. They are tribes, because it's a very old country. When they decide thing, or when, for instance, a person comes to a tribe to marry another woman, all that men of the tribe, they gather like this. And for instance, the head of the tribe will talk, and everybody will listen to him, and they will take a decision, and everybody will agree. That's why they sit in a circle. And there's many reasons, but this is their culture. That's how they take decisions. And you come bomb them. Of course, no military personnel is standing in an oval shape and suggesting to bomb a ship inside in the middle of the desert.
Yeah, I mean, imagine if during Christmas time you had a few hundred people standing around a large Christmas tree, singing carols, and a U.S. fighter jet bombed it with the excuse that it was a suspicious gathering of a large amount of people at night in a public space.
That's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. And regarding the billions of dollars that are being spent in Yemen, also it's funny that Trump, his campaign and his current actions and the decisions that he's taking inside his cabinet and the new government of the United States, يعني, the title of it is to save money, and even he made his allies enemies because he wants more money from other countries, and yet we see them spending billions of dollars in Yemen for no particular reason but to defend the most hated country in the world currently, which is Israel. This is also another disgrace, but unfortunately, the United States currently, I don't know till when, they have a lot of money and they have bases everywhere, and they are doing all of these mistakes, which is leading to killing people and to toppling governments just for the sake of Israel. I don't know till when this will continue. And the part is that when people see that the United States is being weakened, they are happy because they know what the United States did to other people and to their countries, not because they are jealous of the United States. Still, the Americans think that everybody is jealous from them. No, we are not jealous from you. We are fed up of your actions and your governments. And it's funny also that Trump, one of in his campaign that he used for this election and the previous election, he said that he doesn't have blood on his hands. Yet he published such a video showing civilians that have nothing to do with the current war being bombed and being thrown into pieces. And still, I think he still have that video. That's the dangerous that I was talking about. And until now, he's convinced that they killed military people, not civilians. They don't know anything about what's happening in Yemen and in the region. And you talked about putting boots on the ground. I think it's likely that they will do it if they continue like this, because we know the Yemenis, the only reason they said they will stop launching missiles into Israel or stopping Israeli ships to pass by the Red Sea is when Israel stops the war. If Israel doesn't stop the war, the American administration under Trump, they want to feel that they are winning. If bombing civilians and bombing like infrastructure of Yemen doesn't stop Ansarullah from launching missiles, the only option is to use boots on the ground. And we know that Yemen is divided. We have government that are with Saudi Arabia and the Americans and the Israelis and the Emiratis, and we have Ansarullah. So they might use also, they might train Yemenis to fight Ansarullah, although we know, and Sharmin knows, that US training is bullshit. It does nothing. We saw it in Afghanistan and we saw it in Iraq. But at least I think they might send...
They run from a threat. US trained native soldiers run from a threat. Iranian trained native soldiers run towards the threat and eliminate it. Just by the way, Karim, to your statement, do you remember, was it last year or the year before when we saw Ansarullah? It wasn't just Ansarullah. It was the Ansarullah allied armed villagers who were preparing well in advance of anything like this happening on thwarting parachuting special ops, foreign special ops teams from entering and penetrating any part of Yemen. And then there was an actual Western operation which they thwarted. And of course, we don't get the details from the Western media. So any boots on the ground by the Americans is going to be almost funny, I think. They're welcome to parachute into southern Yemen where they have, some allied forces, but nobody is going to countenance this in northern Yemen.
Yeah, you're saying that because you are logical, Sharmeen. But currently, Trump and his administration, they
guys,
don't know
Karim just called me logical. Just bookmark that for all future arguments.
I will ask the editors to cut it.
One other thing, since we're in this discussion about the boots on the ground, actually two things. One, the CNN, the Yemen experts that they interviewed, they talk about that the only way that the United States or a Western alliance could actually do something to deter Yemen's capabilities is to send troops into the country. And the second thing is that, according to their sources, the White House has offered protection to Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and they cite this, like Israel was protected during Iran's retaliation, right, during True Promise 1 and 2. Apparently, the U.S. is trying to convince the Saudis and the Emiratis that, come and fight this war for us, and we will offer you protection, like we protected Israel. Do you think that there's going to be any takers in the Gulf kingdoms for this offer?
I think the Saudis and Emiratis, I think all the Gulf states have sort of, that ship has sailed, that American protection ship. They saw time and time again, after 2015, that the Americans, well, yeah, actually even before that, they saw that Obama reneged on his crossing of the red line in Syria, didn't bomb Syria. They know very well that the U.S. didn't retaliate when Iran shot down the Global Hawk drone a few years ago. State-of-the-art U.S., was it like $210 million drone, undetectable? They saw that the U.S. didn't come to the aid of Gulf countries in their war against Yemen, other than, leading from behind the scenes, providing intelligence, satellite imagery, and, weapons, etc. And of course, the U.S. has become a target of immense hate in this region by supplying Israel with the billions of dollars of weapons every month right now. And don't forget, the Saudis have worked since Trump administration 1.0 to try to get the U.S. to agree to a defense pact. And through the Trump administration, through the Biden administration, now in Trump 2.0, they still haven't gotten that on paper. And then why does any American signature on paper count anymore? Everyone's seen the American violation of Minsk, of, every agreement they've made, the JCPOA with Iran, etc. I don't think the Emiratis and Saudis are going to expect any genuine U.S. defense initiative to protect them just to escalate a war that, for instance, the Saudis don't want. Be honest, the only players that really would like this war to continue on Yemen are the Emiratis and the Israelis in a big way.
Yes, I just, to this idea, right now we're just seeing reports as we start recording this, that a new aircraft carrier has entered the Indian Ocean, the USS Carl Vinson. So now you have the USS Truman, you have the USS Carl Vinson, you have all of these bombers and jets that were deployed to Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, more and more U.S. troops, longer deployment time. To what? To what purpose, right?
No, I just want to say, by the way, there's a long-held view. I wouldn't say long-held, but since conventional war methods were sort of sidelined for more irregular warfare, which is what this region's been seeing in the last 2 decades or so, or more actually, is that if U.S. aircraft carriers come into the waterways around Yemen, Iran, etc., target U.S. states, it actually suggests that they're less likely to go to war, because with missiles, the missile arsenals developed by U.S. adversaries, aircraft carriers are no longer, they're sitting ducks. So, they always say if aircraft carriers come to this region, the U.S. is not preparing for war quite yet. So I'm not sure that's such a big deal anymore. I think it's kind of what the Americans did at the beginning of the conflict, the battles between the Israelis and the Lebanese Hezbollah. Is these U.S. carriers came into the region. Of course, they did nothing. They're there to sort of show might, to project power,
Yes.
and to set perceptions more than anything.
Yes, exactly, because you're not going to see troops being deployed from these carriers.
Yeah, and don't forget, Iran just warned, it's our front page of our news section, Iran has just warned 5 countries in the region. I think it's UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Turkey, and Kuwait, and let me see another one. Basically saying that you're not to allow any U.S. launches from your territory.
Yeah, my view is completely different than Charmin until I see some different actions on the ground. I stick to my opinion. Whatever the United States and Trump says to Saudi Arabia, they will do. And we saw this because they already gave billions of dollars to the United States, and the Emiratis gave $1.4 billion to the United States as investments. And we have to know that Saudi Arabia, the loyalty is more American than Saudi. They breathe American, they buy American, they love America. It's embedded in their system, even in its education, in their education. They love Americans. As simple as that. Imagine that you are a man who's in love to a woman. She's beautiful, but she doesn't care about you, and you give her gifts. That's the relation between Saudi Arabia and the Saudis. That's
And she's a serial killer on top of everything else.
Also,
I will argue continuously that the generational change in these countries has reduced that kind of. I'm not saying that they're not Western centric, but has this is a generation that has national pride, ego, privilege, okay, in the way their grandfathers didn't, where their grandfathers were a creation of Britain, right? Their states were a creation of the British Empire. This generation thinks very differently. You don't inherit altogether those attitudes of subservience. Hang on, Karim. But also that because we have seen in the OPEC plus meetings and in other circumstances, major U.S. allies in the Gulf, like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, decide to opt for positions that the Americans didn't want, like in the OPEC plus votes, regular OPEC plus votes on production. We see that they are acting more in their self-interest, certainly where money is concerned. The Saudis don't want the Yemeni problem. MBS's Vision 2030 has already hit a lot of road bumps, including funding ones. And, he doesn't want to funnel even more money into the money pit that Yemen represents for him. I believe that the Saudi and the Emirati, the massive $1 trillion promises of investment funding that they have, given Trump is not yet delivered. They have learned this game for many, many years. It's not yet delivered, Karim. I believe the $1 trillion these states want to give to Trump is a buyout to not put pressure on them as well, to allow them to navigate in areas that are critical to them based on their own self-interest. And don't forget the Saudi-Iranian normalization deal with the Chinese. The Chinese are not lacking influence in the Gulf countries. Biggest trading partner of the Gulf countries, not the United States, not England, not France. Ultimately, politics does come down to money. And because there's another bloc in the picture, and, you cannot argue that the Saudis and the Emiratis, especially with their getting to know the Russians through OPEC plus, but have a great deal of respect for Russian military prowess. Let's admit none of the global South countries were on the side of Ukraine and the West during this war. Countries have openly resisted the Western narrative on Ukraine, the entire global South for that matter. What I'm saying is they're thinking for themselves. And now the Gulf leaders are people who expect privileges. They know where to pay off money. Okay, I think it's payoff money. I'm not saying they're going to buck American directives, but they will buck directives that are self-defeating for them and will impact them negatively. Maybe the UAE will take a few risks because the UAE really wants to finish the Yemen resistance and, own the ports going through all those critical trade waterways with the Israelis defending them and providing intelligence on them. This is the UAE's path, but it is not a Saudi path yet, even though it dabbles. Okay, I think the UAE and Saudi Arabia, we have seen quite clearly, have very, very disparate vision about not just Yemen, but their influence in the Gulf and West Asia and beyond into the Horn of Africa. They are competitors in many of these arenas.
I agree with you with everything you said, but
Because I'm rational, right, Kenny?
no, yeah, but the problem is that if they want to say no to the Americans, they can't. They are not like sovereign countries. They didn't even want to be sovereign countries. They are protected by the United States. And if I am the Saudi king or whatever, or the crown prince, and I saw what Trump is willing to do to the NATO, to the Europeans, to the countries on his border, to Canada and to Mexico, these countries can stand without the United States. They will
Let
be
me ask you a question.
Yes,
A hypothetical question.
I'm finishing my point. They can be hit, and they can take a hit, but I don't think Saudi Arabia can take half a hit from the Americans. Yani they make money through petrochemicals and oil. If the Americans said we don't want to protect your waters, the next day everything will be more expensive in Saudi Arabia, and the insurance companies will double everything, and many things will change. And even
they can afford it, Karim.
Hopefully.
I'll tell you why they can afford it, because the price of their commodities will be so sky high, they'll be able to build 20 neon cities, okay? This is the thing. This is the unintended consequence of any Trumpian war against Iran. What is that going to do to its allies? So here's my hypothetical question. The U.S. launches war in Iran. Oil prices per barrel double, okay? They double overnight. Are the Gulf countries going to go into insane production in order to help the Americans? Or are they going to do what the Russians say? No, let's keep oil at this ridiculous price. Let the Americans feel the pressure. Oil prices have been deflated for, half a century. Let's just keep them this far. Who do you think the Saudis and the Emiratis are going to listen to? The Americans or the Russians on the oil prices?
If it was a direct order from Trump, they will listen to Trump. That's my opinion.
Biden gave them a direct.
Biden is a Democrat, not a Republican.
Okay.
But guys, okay.
And you know what? You know what they have? Trump talked to Zelensky about cards. You have no cards, right? The Saudis and the Emiratis have cards now. Okay.
Hopefully, I will not be such. That's what I.
Wait.
I just want to comment on something. I think I might be wrong, but as I see it, is that I think all the weapons and the bombers and the things that is coming from the Western media regarding the U.S. Navy and Army, I think they are directed towards Yemen, not towards Iran.
Okay, hold on. Because this discussion about oil prices and, the effects that a war with Iran may have, we cannot escape what's happening with the tariffs, right? And today we're witnessing a second Black Monday. We're seeing market after market crash. We're seeing oil prices crash under $60 a barrel. We're seeing everything, crypto fell. Everything is falling except for gold. I think gold, obviously, the only thing that is climbing. So Trump saying
gold's come down a notch too.
Imagine gold to get hurt for all of this, and Trump is essentially saying this is a pill that needs to be swallowed. Tariffs are beautiful, the most beautiful word in the English language. We are not going to backtrack. Everyone's feeling the pinch, right? And this is more than a pinch. Like at this point, we're seeing a real concern for a global recession. So if this continues, right, because this is Trump's strategy at the end of the day, I think I actually might side with Charmin in this one, in which is like, why would I listen to the dude who is destroying our markets instead of the guy who's trying to protect our markets? In this case, the OPEC plus production quota, right, that they have maintained for like 2 years now at this point, or maybe even more. So
because you love him and he's your boss.
That's the question, right? Like, how much are they gonna love him at the end of this? How much is he gonna be beloved? That's what I'm most curious about, because at this point, with what he's doing with the economy, it seems like, a war with Iran, it's gonna be truly come secondary to whatever destruction he causes just with these tariffs. So, if you guys have something else to add to that, go ahead. If not, maybe we can.
I just want to point out, everyone's freaking out about Trump's tariffs. I don't know about. It's not logical to do this with friendly countries. It's logical to, if there are imbalances in trade, talk with your partners, talk with other countries where the imbalances exist, who are not necessarily your allies, but are, friendly enough, and try to correct those balances. Going to war against the whole world is obviously where the problem is. Changes, when you're the global financial leader, okay, when this is an order that serves you, the last thing you want to do is upend it through a series of threatening stances and actual threats and punishments with the whole world. But that's Trump's style. None of us actually know his end game in launching this war.
He doesn't know.
It's very possible. But I think, look, we saw in Trump's first term that he did a lot of bluster, mainly to give himself some negotiating strength before negotiating something maybe weaker than he would have liked. But I want to say that I'm not fundamentally opposed to, just personally, okay, not opposed to the wrecking ball that he's swinging through the global economy. I'm not opposed to that. I think it's so artificial. I think economics today, finance capitalism, as we call it here at the Cradle, is so out of whack today that it needs to crash and burn and then be rebuilt with saner, wiser minds, okay, behind a new models. That's happening anyways. It's happening in the new rising bloc that is looking for alternative financial mechanisms. It's looking for alternative financial institutions and currencies and et cetera, and concepts. But the wrecking ball approach just accelerates us getting out of a US-led finance capitalism order to something else. We don't know what that else is. Of course, that's chaos, but chaos also for smaller, smarter actors always presents an opportunity. Okay, not for the big dinosaur, the brontosaurus that the US is, small brain, big lumbering body that once it gets on a trajectory finds very hard to stop or change course, right? Trump's just, the Trump brontosaurus is just like jumping off cliffs right now, hoping something will land on it. One of them will land on its feet. But actually, from our perspective as sort of middle states, in a key critical geography like West Asia, which bridges Europe and Asia, okay, this is an opportunity for our smarter, more focused, determined resistance, to finance capitalism and the carnage it wreaks, right? The war in Gaza, the war in Yemen, the war in Lebanon, the war in Syria, the list goes on. So I'm fundamentally not opposed to this, even though it could create more carnage, because carnage is where we're at right now. We're going to do an article for, I think it'll be out next week, an examination on how basically U.S. policy, meaning U.S./Israeli policy. So this is U.S. policy. The Israelis are the implementers, okay, is to destroy every single Arab and Muslim army in this region. Now, of course, they sell billions of dollars to their close Arab/Muslim allies in this region, but those are hunks of metal that they're selling them because they can all be disabled at the punch of a button. They're also not selling them anything that gives them a qualitative advantage, even if they sell them and the Israelis the same plane. By the way, the Israelis have complete veto on what the Americans sell any of their Gulf allies, their Arab allies, right? They are not the hunk of metal that they receive is qualitatively less productive than what Israel receives in the end. As for the Arab armies that and Muslim armies that the Americans view as adversaries in this region, they plain out want to destroy them, as we're seeing in Syria. So you have American allies, right? The Al-Qaeda-backed HTS government in Damascus right now, but they're allowing the Israelis not only to destroy all of Syria's old military capabilities, installations, fighter jets, weapons stores, etc., but they're allowing Israel as America's implementers to take the south of the country in order to, I think, eventually help the Israelis reach the Euphrates with the, Kurdish allies, right? Which then crosses over into Iraq and Turkey and Iran. So that's like, again, but to destroy all these, their targeted armies, what we can expect for the foreseeable future is Israeli-U.S. carnage in this region, as far as they can go. But in the end, it doesn't mean anything. They're flailing about like this, destroying everything in sight because A, we're letting them, okay? And B, they're in complete panic mode. They do not have the cards anymore in this world. It used to be that one director from the U.S. was enough for everyone to shut up around the world. Right now, every single country is pushing back, including American allies.
The mentality of Israel says that even though, for instance, UAE is now our ally, in the future, it might be our enemy. And they don't want like sophisticated weapons that might target Israel even after 30, 40 years. This is the same mentality they use against Egypt. And you mentioned the United States.
Yeah.
Yes. And you mentioned the United States. It's not only the United States, even Germany, France, and the UK, if they want to sell weapons to Egypt, they have to get the okay from Israel first. And this happened, I think, like 6-7 years ago when France sold helicopter carrier for Egypt. They had to like manipulate some of this ship so it will be weaker and not pose a threat to Israel.
But I also want to say, like, Israel thinks that it can continue doing these things because nobody's stopping them. But I've argued that the stopping them is going to come. It's going to come slowly, and then reach critical mass. And today the British press had an article that a bunch of very, very important lawyers in the UK are pressing charges against 10 British citizens for war crimes because they were in Gaza. This is the UK. Any one of these court cases tried in any jurisdiction around the world, and obviously jurisdictions vary in terms of the effects they have on others in the legal community, but something like this prosecuted to a good conclusion in the UK will have a freezing effect on so many of Israel's activities, in the sense that British companies and British nationals will no longer be able to act as they did in the last 17, 18 months with zero repercussions. And the first place we're going to see this, when the lawsuits, start to be settled, is in large multinational companies. Because when you sue these companies, you get hundreds and millions, hundreds of millions and billions potentially. And it creates, everything is about PR for them. Yeah. Marketing, right? So I think it's only just starting for Israel. They're going for gold while they can, but the Israeli state does not have many years left. It just simply cannot carry out war for years on end. We can see that the reservists are not coming back. okay? We can see that their army and the willingness of their army to fight actually on the ground in territories is diminished. We can see that the settlers in the south and the north are very hesitant to go back, even when money's thrown at them. We can see that the entire Israeli political system is twisted up into very nasty balls, okay? Sides being, entrenched against each other, suits being filed in courts against each other. This is among the political elite, This is trickling down to business as well, because the Israeli economy has been terribly, terribly hit by endless war. So, Israel doesn't have much more time, so it's trying to do maximum damage. And Israel, it's not changed its philosophy for years. Disarm countries violently or, launch aggressions against them. Haven't they learned that every single time they've done that, they have helped create or buoy a resistance that just gets smarter and tougher over time? So, I don't think giving them a quality of military edge is going to help them, because their time is ticking.
To your point, Sharmina, about the military wars, I just want to point out only 2% of the Haredim, of the ultra-Orthodox who were called up over the past year, enlisted. Right? It's only
they don't have manpower.
And you, Esteban, you were telling me that Netanyahu had to change that.
Yes, that's exactly where I want to go now, because Netanyahu in Washington, D.C. today, right? Before we wrap up for this week anyway, and in the context of Netanyahu being in Washington, D.C., we just need to mention the horrific images from last night in Rafah, in which Israel bombs a tent where journalists were sheltering, and again burns Palestinians alive, shredding children. My goodness, honestly, there's simply no more words to be said. Dr. Marwan Barghouti last week comes out in an interview and says that 90,000 tons of U.S. explosives have been dropped inside Gaza. That's about 40 kilos per person. Per inhabitant of Gaza, 40 kilos of U.S. explosives have been dropped inside the strip. I asked Grok earlier today to tell me how much is that the equivalent in nuclear bombs. That's the equivalent of 6.5 Hiroshima bombs that have been dropped inside Gaza. Regardless of all of this, Netanyahu welcomed in Washington today, where he set to meet with Donald Trump to discuss the tariffs. On his way to the United States, the Wing of Zion, right, the Israeli presidential plane, has to take a route that is 400 kilometers longer to avoid flying over certain countries. Apparently, the Israelis are very concerned, in particular about Ireland, Iceland, and the Netherlands, that these countries might actually enforce the ICC arrest warrants. Every other country that they flew over, they know they're not going to do it. They flew over France. France doesn't give a crap. Netanyahu went to Hungary last week. What did Viktor Orban do? He withdrew from the ICC in a show of complete support for the genocide, for the burning alive of journalists, for the dismembering of children. But there is a concern, right? That is my point. There is a concern for Netanyahu. This is the second time that he has done this, because the first time that he went to the U.S. last year, he also had to fly a longer route. So long, in fact, that the Wing of Zion was only able to carry the minimal amount of people, because they needed that much fuel in order to make their way around all of these countries. So in a way, I do agree with Sharmeen in that the world is starting to slowly close in around the Israeli death cult that is genocide. Too slowly, indeed. That is my point. This is happening way too slowly.
But once, like I said, once these cases get filed and you have successful rulings, you will have a freezing over in many, many sectors. But I want to say, I've always thought, why, what is the U.S. going to do when empire collapses? And I sort of figured that what they would try to do is diminish everyone else so that it can still stay on top, right? The U.S. is diminishing its allies. You have Japan, South Korea, and China meeting up, last week?
Yes.
To work together, three countries that have historical woes with each other, to work together to offset the American tariff and other aggressions, right? They're finding common cause. But here's the thing with the old theory that when empire collapses, it'll try to diminish everyone so it can still stay on top, is that's exactly what Trump's doing now. That's exactly what the Americans are doing, okay, and have been doing even prior to Trump. But here's the thing. There's players on the block that will not diminish. They're rising. This is not the European players. The American axis will diminish, okay? But the new players are not constrained by America's diktats. They're not constrained by America's economy or financial punishments, thanks to what they've learned on how to counter sanctions. They're not constrained by, American insurance for shipping or American transportation or American telecommunications, because they've developed their own systems. So as the US's allies diminish, so that America can still be, the top dog in their alliance, there are other players rising. And let me tell you, they're going to look more and more attractive to the US's European allies as every year ticks by.
Especially
yeah, it will be interesting. And I think I don't know how when the United States collapses, I don't know if the last thing that they will hang to is their 800 foreign bases or their economy. And maybe they will pay, the last payment will be for the foreign bases, not for their people. That's how I see it. And I see also that we might see states like California and Texas, and they might be their own country as what happened in the USSR.
They probably will be. One last thing before we close up, I just want to mention today the Belgian Prime Minister said that Netanyahu would not be arrested if he travels to Belgium. Right, Belgium, the capital of the European Union, essentially Brussels, also home of the Hind Rajah Foundation. So I imagine this is not going to be a good next couple of months or years for this.
It's logical if you compare their history. It's logical for Belgium.
I mean, like I said, both the world.
They used to have a human zoos. Not
true.
They used to have a human zoo not long ago.
Belgium responsible for the horrible genocide in the Congo. So the birds of a feather, I guess, is the correct term here.
Before we wrap up today, however, Esteban, let's again remind our viewers that today the Cradle Turkey has officially launched. We aim to reach Turkish-speaking audiences in not just Turkey, but Turkic countries and in Central Asia and elsewhere. So, make sure if you speak Turkish or know anyone who does, to let them know about the cradleturkey.com for a new spin on West Asian geopolitics, unlike anything that exists out there.
Exactly the type of flavor that the Cradle brings to the table and what has allowed us to become, what we are today. And of course, we become what we are today thanks to your support. So again, we want to remind you to please leave a like, to share, to subscribe to our channel, to find us on social media platforms. Thank you so much for joining us this week. And above all, check out our Patreon where you can support us directly. And we'll see you again next week for the Cradle News Roundup. My name is Esteban Carrillo. I have been joined by Karim Shami and Sharmin Narwani.